I'm Niall Campbell, and I'm chair of the trustees for the RHF Museum. And I was in the battalion for 36 and a half years. I joined in the 70s, so I loved the battalion and the regiment. And I took over as chair about a year and a half ago as chair of trustees, but I was a trustee for long before that. We've been here since 1959 on the amalgamation of the Highland Light Infantry, which I'll refer to as the HLI, and the Royal Scots Fusiliers, which I'll just refer to as the RSF. So those two very famous regiments amalgamated in 1959 and became the Royal Highland Fusiliers, hence our museum. And we were the Royal Highland Fusiliers until 2006, 59 years. And then there was another amalgamation, which you may or may not be aware of, called the Royal Regiment of Scotland, which has all the battalions in that one regiment. And we are the second battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland, the Royal Highland Fusiliers. So we do keep the golden thread or tenuous link all the way through. But we're responsible for all the history of the HLI and the RSF as far as possible. I know other places have bits and pieces. We have, courtesy of the HLI and the RSF, 19 Victoria Crosses, of which the original 6 are here. You go and look at them later on with their names on it. And they are very, very special indeed. For whatever reason, they attract the public imagination, they attract the military imagination. And of our 19 Victoria Crosses, we had 7 awarded to officers and 12 awarded to other ranks. And the officers went from second lieutenant to lieutenant colonel, and the other ranks from private to sergeant. And then if we split them down, or I do, 13 of our 19 were given one by the Highland Light Infantry, and 6 were won by the Royal Scots Fusiliers. 6 of them, and we're going to talk about one of them, are pre-World War I. And they have a special rarity in their own way, and I'll come back to that. In India, Egypt, Sudan, and 3 in South Africa, which is quite interesting. 11 were won in World War I. That's where most of them were won for all the services, particularly the army. And then 2 only in World War. The BC itself, that some of you will know, was instigated in January 1856 during the Crimean War. And we've got medals downstairs when we were in the Crimean War as well. And it's the premier decoration for gallantry. Note, it is not a medal. It's a decoration, it's not a medal. Open to all ranks since the outbreak of the Crimean War. When she raised it, it was going to be for the brave, and you'll see on these Victoria Crosses here, she didn't like for the brave because she regarded all the soldiers and sailors as brave, so she wanted it for valour. She didn't want to diminish it and say that other people were brave. During the Crimean War, 111 PCs were awarded. You'll see later on the design, very, very simple. It's a cross, it's not circular, it's cheap bronze, it's not in silver, and it was meant to have had limited or no monetary value at all. That was the purpose of it. Soldiers weren't meant to sell it, which didn't go on. So it's very simple, very vague. You couldn't necessarily look at a Victoria Cross, just they are all the same. You wouldn't know the 6th year, what era they came from, unless you turned it over and looked at the back, and it only has the date of which it was won and his name and unit. Right, so you have to know, well, that's 1914. They must have been doing something in World War I. But there's meant to be universal, so there was no only medal. There was not no distinction of class or rank, which is unusual for the time and remains so to this day. So this has some valour on it, and the story goes, this bronze, it is cheap, comes from a captured cannon, allegedly from the Battle of Sebastopol in Crimea, but rethinking and metallurgy tests all this and decided actually this is from a Chinese cannon, it wasn't a Russian cannon in Crimea. But I think the mood music now is just from a Chinese cannon, which we have. And the bronze has taken trunnions, which the cannon sits on in its wheels formation, and a big ball at the back called the cascabel. Those are the only 2 areas for which the bronze is taken to make these Victoria Crosses. And there's still enough to make a few more Victoria Crosses yet. As we've only awarded 12 since World War II, were okay, I think. Because they're going down in number. They were awarded, they had to be witnessed by an officer and up to 3 other people. There are very rare exceptions where it wasn't witnessed by an officer or indeed witnessed by our own side. There's one famous award given to a pilot, and the citation came through from the German submarine captain. So there's some really odd stories out there, some fascinating stories. But that is how it's recommended. And then coming on, since 1856, 1,358 Victoria Crosses have been awarded. And we've got 6 of them sitting right here. 836 to the Army, 107 to the Navy, 31 to the RAF, 10 to the Marines, and 4 to civilians, unusually. Currently, never awarded to a female. The key words, though, when being considered, and the great tome of the Victoria Cross Manual, is to risk your own life to save others. That was the original purpose of risk your own life to save others. And when we come on to World War I, that's one of the reasons why so many of these Victoria Crosses were awarded in World War I. I'm going to cover the period from 1858, 2 years after Victoria Cross, through until World War I, going through the Boer War in 1899 to 1902. For us, if you were an officer and you won the VC and you survived, actually great things happened to you. You were promoted to the ranks. We got one Victoria Cross when I was a major, ended up a major general. You had quite a good life. Sadly, the stories I tell, for the way some of our soldiers were treated, it makes me think even now, gosh, we may not serve them quite as well as we thought we could have done with our Victoria Crosses. So I'm looking at 4 men, 2 from the Royal Scots Fusiliers, 2 from the Highland Infantry. They came from Glasgow, Birmingham, Edinburgh, and Ayrshire. So when they joined a regiment, so they didn't all necessarily come from the streets of Glasgow. The first man did. 3 died young, in their 40s, under pretty unfortunate circumstances, 1 or 2 of them. And the first one I want to touch on is Private Rogers. Private Rogers, he's a Glasgow man, born in Govan, just the other side of the river here, in 1829, and joined up at 20 years old into the 71st Foot. He's a single man. He's got 1 sister. Captain Blackwood writes of Rogers, a native of Glasgow. And I would imagine of Scottish parents. He never bragged or made anything of his love. But the battalion itself has been to Canada, goes to Crimea, has a respite in Malta, and then it's off to India. It's a very experienced, old-fashioned battalion. They were veterans and campaigners inured to hardship, and Rogers served 9 years with them in India. Now, when they were in India, a lot of the British troops were going across to India, in simple terms, to help out the East India Company, which was actually running India up until 1858, during the Indian Mutiny, between 1857 and 1858. And it was a series of complaints, and the only one I've in a folk song, because I reckon even from our school days, I put is a complex matter. But you may be aware of the greased cartridge controversy in the Indian Mutiny with the rifles that were issued. The new Enfield rifle used greased cartridges, but still old-fashioned enough, you had to bite off the top of the cartridge to pour the powder down the barrel, even though it's only a rifle. And this caused huge upset with the Indian and Muslim sepoys, as the grease was rumoured to be made from pig fat or beef tallow, which is against both their religions. This is one of the kick points for this mutiny, along with poor pay and allowances, the way that the East India Company was treating the royal princes and princesses, because most of it was still run through the Indian armies, the sepoys, discontent with British rule, and also rumours of conversion to Christianity. All these things conspired during way back then for an uprising of the mutiny in Barrackpore, and then in Meerut Mutiny in 1857. The battle itself, which actually is a bit of a non-event, it's a short, and the citation for his VC is only 54 words long. For daring conduct at Murat, Qualaur, on the 16th of June 1858, in attacking by himself a party of 7 rebels, 1 of whom he killed. This was remarked as valuable service, the party of rebels being well armed and strongly posted in the line of advance of a detachment of the 71st Regiment. It doesn't give you a lot to go on this chap, Rogers here. But they had joined in this battle, and they were taking on the Highlanders. But I think it was more interesting that the battle took place in 1858, and he was recommended in November 1859 and received it in April 1860. When the Queen Victoria was awarded the first round of Victoria Crosses, there were senior officers who felt this was not really a dumb thing. Why would we want lucky men whose duty it is to do and die with the Victoria Cross for what they've been doing for ages? There was nothing through the Peninsula Campaign, Napoleonic Wars, nothing for the 74th Foot in 1803 at the Battle of Assaye, because there were no awards for bravery until we got to the DCM in the Crimea. So this particular Victorian Cross, the 71st and 74th, the HLI, were slightly old-fashioned. And like many officers, they didn't really approve of the Victoria Cross. They just thought it was doing duty. And I found it more interesting. In the Chronicles, actually, I couldn't remember, we have comment from officers and some majors on what Rogers and his VC. And this is one of them. On the 16th of June, 1858, at Maran, the first and only VC which fell to the 71st was one. It was far from being the only one that was deserved, but I'd been told by the old men that the sentiment of the regiment at the time was rather against recommendations for the VC, and there was a strong feeling in some other corps, men's names, and those of officers too, were put forward to receive this coveted decoration when the individual gallantry has been little more than their duty. Now, so this is the 71st, okay, out there. Such was the creed of the 71st and many other braver regiments that we should have numbered no cross among our decorations had it not been done at the sight of Brigadier Sir Robert Napier. Now, the HLI, the 71st, didn't put any recommendations forward throughout the Indian Mutiny or the Crimea War. But this particular one, and you can almost tell from the wording, the original citation, this was remarked as a valuable service, not by the commanding officer of the 71st. No, it was remarked on by a man called Brigadier Robert Napier. He was the brigade commander. And so, since the inception of the VC, only 2 years before, it was customary for a regiment to submit one or two recommendations. This did not suit the 71st, and they did not submit Roger's name. Robert Napier did. And there's another extract in the HLI Chronicles from a General Rich, who was a company commander at the time of this attack, who says, "From my recollection of the story, which was the talk of the mess that evening, I can say that after I'd taken 2 companies to the front in skirmishing order, and while engaged with our enemy, another body of them, a considerable weight to the left, opened fire. When one of our companies in support was wheeled up to oppose the commander, Lieutenant Scott, he was attacked by 6 or 7 sepoys, when Private Rogers came to his rescue, bayoneted 6 of them, and captured the 7th. Another officer, Captain Blackwood, originally a sergeant major, so you might have a slightly different take on this, recalls John Wall of K Company, my old batman, who minds all such events, says that Brigadier Napier saw Rogers attacked by 4 bandies, and he killed 2, and the other 2 fled, and for this he recommended him. He recommended him a year later. Nothing to do with the 71st. Blackwood disagrees with General Rich's story of saving Lieutenant Scott, and says Sergeant Ewing saved Scott. It's not considered that Sergeant Ewing did anything more than his duty. From the old Peninsula times, there's been a feeling of what one's duty was, and any theatrical show was discouraged. I, says Sergeant Major Blackwood, now Captain, can recall many acts of devotion done during my term of service that required more self-sacrifice than this act of Rogers. Rogers does well, he does 10 years, and they return to England in 1865. Sadly, Rogers, like many of our old soldiers then, had become addicted to drink in the light of India. I mean, it was dirt cheap. They had their own staff, even soldiers had their own servants and staff then. And this led to his end. He returned to Glasgow and just swiftly on 9th of March 1870, he's visiting his sister in Governor Street, things just over the right, in the hope of obtaining booze. She refused him and told him to stay in the flat until she returned from work. Still desperate for a drink, Rogers searches her flat and found a lightly lemon bottle in the kitchen. Without checking the contents, he drank a lot and is soon in agony. His sister returns to find he drank the entire bottle of vitriol, sulfuric acid, and has suffered a horrific death. He's buried in a common grave in the southern necropolis in the Gauls district of Glasgow. Now, this poor chap, you see, even then, this is not long after the Victoria Cross, the regiment's busy, and so he dies at the age of 41. No one's really caring about him. And I have to say, we changed 2004, we took part, the Royal Highland Fusiliers, with a lady from Abercorn Memorials at Edinburgh. We eventually placed a memorial stone over his unmarked grave on George Rogers, you see. Coming forward the odd 50 years, Ravenhill. He is another man, as a slightly unfortunate time. I'm just going to talk about the Boer War. He married a lady called Florence in 1898, their first child's born in 1900, and George Ravenhill joins the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Scots Fusiliers in 1889. This battalion arrived in South Africa in November 1899, late November 1899. That's quite important. So this battalion has been around the world, but it has never had any serious fighting against anybody that isn't what might be called of the third world country. Africa, India, people they can probably quite easily beat with their drill. And they come up against the Boers in December 1899, a month later, and 2 RSF steps into the breach. That first week was as Black Week back here in this country. There were 3 utter defeats by the British Army, by the Boers. A place called Stormberg on the 10th of December, Magersfontein on the 11th of December, and we're going to talk about Colenso on the 15th of December. During that 1 week, 2,776 soldiers were killed and 12 guns were lost. Some would say it was the worst disaster in a generation into this battle. The Battle of Colenso, the third of the 3 disasters in that week, if any done, was a complete disaster. And it's being led by a man called General Redvers Buller, knowing otherwise the General Sir Reverse Buller, Victoria Cross. There is Victoria Cross, well over-promoted, should have hung around at full colonel, brigadier, and he's in charge of the army in South Africa at the time. Doesn't last very long after this disaster. He's got 5 infantry brigades, artillery support, navy, got a force of 21,000 men, and he's on his way to relieve Ladysmith. And 2 RSF and our George Ravenhill are in the 6th Brigade. This is a bit of the plan. The plan resolved itself into a frontal attack directed on 3 separate positions on an indifferently reconnoitred position held in unknown strength by an entrenched enemy, a position sheltered along the greater part of its front by a broad river believed to be fordable at 2 or 3 points only and resting its left on a rocky hill. The 2 main attacks were to take place across absolutely open ground. There was no attempt to save the troops by getting down to the river under cover of darkness or crossing in the grey light of morning. Against any enemy at any period since the introduction of the rifle, such tactics would have been difficult to justify, but not to General Buller, who is under pressure, having had 2 disasters in that week, goes, I've got the solution. And he just launches this attack. And in simple terms, on the left side is a Major General Hart, who's ambushed 7 kilometres from Colenso. They've made a mistake because they've got inaccurate maps, fired on by the Boers, losing 400 casualties in 20 minutes. In the centre, where we're interested, there's a Colonel Long who commands 2 batteries of 12 15-pounders and 6 12-pounders, and advances these guns right up to the bend in the river, because he was a man who thought artillery should be used at short range. So you can practically see the Boers. Unfortunately, the Boers can see him. And in the space of a very short period of time, between about 7:30 in the morning and about 11 o'clock, they are hammered. The artillery are just destroyed by the Boers. Sitting in amongst them, none other, are A, B, E, and F Company of the Royal Scots Fusiliers, doing their bit because they are the escorts to the guns. The gunners come under heavy fire from the trenches on the opposite bank. The guns are abandoned. Long, the gunner commander, seriously wounded, and by 7:30, all the shells have been used to little effect. And so they're sitting in little dry riverbeds behind their guns, being absolutely hammered. And the order goes out from Mr. General Buller, I need the guns back, even if we can't get the troops back. And he's slightly waylaid, I want the guns back. And he tries to recover the guns. Bear in mind how near there were 12 and 6, there were 18 guns sitting there. There's more guns than the Boers have got anywhere in battle. So out goes the cry, and a number of officers go forward to try and rescue the guns, along with troops from the Royal Scots Fusiliers, one of them being our man Ravenhill. And for that, during this battle, where the detachment serving had been killed, wounded, driven by infantry fire at close range, they saved 2 guns. Private Ravenhill is wounded in the process. The Boers take 10 guns and half the British field artillery and more than all the guns owned by the Boers. His citation, at Colenso on the 15th of December, Ravenhill went several times under heavy fire from his sheltered position as one of the escort to the guns to assist the officers and drivers who were trying to withdraw the guns to the 14th and 66 batteries, where detachments serving them had all been killed, wounded, or killed upon them by infantry fire at close range, helped to limber up one of the guns that was saved. He did quite a great job there, but an interesting story for him, there's 2 aspects to this. The Battle of Colenso, I think there were, I forget how many, there were 78 VCs awarded during the Boer War, between 1899 and 1902. 7 awarded the Battle of Colenso. 7. Old Ravenhill doesn't get his, a bit like Rogers, for quite a while. Ravenhill was quite a man because he also was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal in another battle, but they took it off him when he was retrospectively awarded the Victoria Cross for Colenso. So he's quite the character, is Ravenhill. He stays in the army until 1908, having served 13 years. Now, this poor chap also comes, unfortunately, at hard times. When he arrives back in Birmingham, not Scotland, Birmingham, must be just as rough down there, he falls on hard times. And his case is even mentioned in the House of Commons, when the MP for Droitwich says, I beg to ask the Secretary of State for War if he's now in a position to say what action, if any, is proposed to be taken by the War Office to relieve Ravenhill VC, who is or was recently an inmate at Erdrington Workhouse, of the necessity of taking advantage of public charity. Mr. Haldane, Secretary of State for War, said the case is still under investigation. No follow-up takes place, and poor old Mr. Ravenhill, George Ravenhill, falls foul of the law a number of times, and he's eventually caught stealing lead along with a mate in Birmingham, for which he goes to court, and he is imprisoned. So he complains, though. He was charged with a theft of iron to the value of 6 shillings from Mr. Ross. Ravenhill, in his defence, said he was due a pension. This is one of the big gripes. You wonder what the regiment was doing, of £50 a year, but had heard nothing from the authorities about his claim. The judge didn't agree with Ravenhill and jailed him for a month, as a result of which he's one of 8 men who had their Victoria Cross forfeited, and he lost his VC. Now, this poor chap, he's got a family as well, and he's struggling to make ends meet. He goes to jail. When he comes out of jail, sadly, 3 of his current 4 children are then taken off him because they can't all live in the workhouse and are sent over to Canada, just removed from him modern or ancient childcare and sent to Canada to be looked after. He never sees them again. So it's not a slightly tragic decision to send 3 children off to Canada. He has 2 more children, but they both die before the age of 1. Now, poor old Ravenhill, no longer called Ravenhill VC, at the start of World War I, he's living down in Oxfordshire with his wife, and he serves in the Oxfordshire Berkshire Light Infantry, he serves in the Hampshire Regiment and the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry before being discharged in 1916. And he dies of a heart attack in 1921 at the age of 49. No wonder, I thought to myself. Leaving behind his wife and 5 remaining children, he had a lot of children in extreme poverty. While he had a full military funeral with honours down in Birmingham, his grave too was only marked with the number 36 of it, and on a wall, on a nearby wall, it tells you who he is. I'm just going to focus on Private Wilson. Private Wilson, he died at 40. He's an Edinburgh man, and he is born in the Bull Market, and his dad's in the Navy. He's got 2 brothers and 5 sisters. He's educated in Edinburgh, and he's a newspaper seller. He enlists very briefly into the artillery, sees the light, and enlists in the Highland Light Infantry on the 28th September 1904, and reports to the depot the 1st of October, and then battalion in 1905. And he arrives in France on the 10th of August 1914, and the HLI are part of the 2nd Division, sitting down in Aldershot. The HLI have had a great time until they came back to England. They're very, very experienced. We've got officers and men who were in service of the officers in Egypt in 1882, fighting Tel Kabir, India 1884 to 1900, fighting on the northwest frontier, and then they come back and they join the British Expeditionary Force sitting in Aldershot. Very old-fashioned battalion, very experienced, can shoot, eyeballs off a fly. People get paid for their shooting. That's what they do. And sport. They fit and they shoot, but they have no experience of fighting against the giants. We're in a different scale. French and German armies, over 1 million strong. In the little British Expeditionary Force, there's 100,000. And they march off into France, deploying on the 13th of August. And their HLI spend throughout the Battle of Mons and the retreat from Mons. They're marching every day. They sleep at night briefly. They go out the next day. They keep retreating back and back and back. They're knackered. Retreat from Mons. They go down across the Marne. They retreat across that. And then there is the phase where they stop, French army recover, and we counterattack just before they launched into Paris. This phase of the war, I choose this one, this is not trench warfare. This is still fighting in the countryside, quite old-fashioned still. Officers have their swords, they are carrying their swords through the marches. They haven't dug trenches, they're digging holes in the ground, they're moving constantly, and they come across, counterattack from the Marne to the River Aisne, A-I-S-N-E. And the River Aisne is a key point from a strategic point of view between the 12th and the 15th of September 1914, after which trench warfare begins. And it's on the River Aisne. The Germans have stepped back behind the river and on the north side bank on a place particular where we were, in a place called Chemin de Dame, the ladies' route to one of the many French kings. He built this route, his daughters carries them, and it overlooks the valley and everything. It's in this chaos of this battle here for 3 days, through the 12th and 15th September. It's comprised of many small battles, the river crossing, small villages, German counterattacks. Units become mixed up as reinforcements are fed in to try and break through the River Aisne because they don't want this place, the line to develop. In 3 days, 13,000 British, 30,000 French, and 20,000 German are casualties in 3 days. And into this maelstrom, after the Battle of Marne, 2 HLI who've been sitting on their backsides briefly, recovering, step into the chaos. And the 14th September, during the Battle of the Aisne, the King's Royal Rifle Corps, reinforced by 2nd Worcestershire and 2nd HLI, notice all these numbers are 1st and 2nd. This is the regular army. There's not, 15 HLI, 16 HLI. They are much later. These are the old regular battalions. And these 3 battalions are behind the advance up eastern slopes. And it's at a place called Verneuil, 2 HLI come into action for the first time since the retreat from Mons. A platoon led by Lieutenant Sir Archibald Gibson Craig, sword held high, charges the German positions, but Gibson Craig is killed in the assault. Another machine gun opens up, causing heavy casualties, but couldn't be located. The troops took cover where they could. Seeing some figures moving in a small wood nearby, Private Wilson believed he knew where the machine gun was. Wilson saw some movement and opened fire, bringing down 2 Germans. He springs out of cover before the enemy could recover and charges the position. He reached a small hollow where there were 8 Germans and 2 British prisoners. He fooled them into believing he was not on his own. The Germans surrender. Having called for help to take the prisoners away, he turns the machine gun. He persuades a rifleman from the King's Royal Rifle Corps to join him and stalk the position. Unfortunately, he's killed by a shell, but Wilson carries on alone, spots the gunner in a heap of hay, taking careful aim, he shot the gunner, and then his replacement shot more of them and charged the position. The officer commanding the gunners sprang out firing a pistol, which missed. Wilson bayonets him. Wilson then used the gun against the German. Wounded, he staggers back to his own lines, where he faints. What I find interesting about this is the war diary, 14th September, ordered to reinforce troop at the top of Verneuil Bridge at 12 noon. Enemy driven back. After dark, advanced the brigade as far as Chemin de Dame. Brigade not supported from left to right, so returned to Verneuil. During the day, part of D Company, under Sir Archibald Gibson Craig, charged the enemy and killed a large number. But adjutants used to be brief. After that, so much more was written. Casualties, 12 men killed, 32 officers wounded, 82, including 3 officers and 79 men, missing 14 men. So in 5 days, the battalion loses 108 out of the battalion strength of 800, just in 5 days. Now, they've already come back from Mons, gone through Marne. so they're losing casualties at quite a rate. Young Wilson is gazetted on the 15th of December 1914. So there's a quick flash to bang compared to other two soldiers. Medals presented to him by King George V in St. Omer in France on the 4th of December. He was the first man from Edinburgh to win the Victoria Cross, although we like to claim it as one of ours, and he became known as the Newsboy VC. And he remains in hospital until the 16th January 15, and then he's returned to Britain. He, like our other two soldiers, struggles with authority, and his disciplinary record is not good. Confined to barracks 3 times during May and June 1915. Now, this is a guy, Wilson VC, we're locking you up. You know, there's quite a different culture. You got your VC, move on. We're not having you misbehave. It's quite interesting reading this. He's smoking under escort, being absent from the platoon, fined 28 days' pay for overstaying his pass, using obscene language and resisting arrest to his escort. He returns to France eventually in July 15, comes back in 16, discharged for being unfit for service, gets a job through the Lord Provost of Edinburgh. He re-enlists in 19, goes back to France for garrison duties. He then takes ill in 19 and discharged, and he dies, sadly, at a pretty young age. George did not marry, never had any children. Increasing dependent, sadly, on alcohol. We've heard that story already. And he sells his Victoria Cross for £5 and lives with his sister Mary and her husband at 20 Bank Street, Edinburgh. Dies in Gravely Hospital, Edinburgh, on the 22nd of April, 1926. The final note I'm leading to a much later era, 1942. So we're still discussing medals. And in the House of Parliament, our man, Winston Churchill, stands up, former commander of the 6th Battalion of the Royal Scots Fusiliers in World War I. On the 22nd of March, when addressing the House of Commons on the debate of war decorations and medals, we go round in circles. If all have it, it is of less value. There must therefore be heartburnings and disappointments on the borderline. A medal glitters, but it also casts a shadow. The task of drawing up regulations for such awards is one which does not admit of a perfect solution. It is not possible to satisfy everybody without running the risk of satisfying nobody. All that is possible is to give the greatest satisfaction to the greatest number and to hurt the feelings of the fewest. Thank you very much.